December 29, 2024. A Jeju Air Flight departs from Bangkok, bound for Muin International Airport in South Korea. Hours later, it crashes, 179 lives lost in the deadliest aviation disaster in South Korea's history. But what caused it? Investigators were stunned when they uncovered the true cause. December 29, 2024. It was meant to be a routine flight. Jeju Air Flight 2216, a Boeing 737-800, prepared to take off from Bangkok's bustling Suvarnabhumi Airport. On board were 175 passengers and 6 crew members, 181 people in total. Many of them were returning home after holidays in Thailand, looking forward to reuniting with loved ones in South Korea. Others were business travelers, navigating one of Asia's most popular flight routes. For Jeju Air, a leading low-cost airline in South Korea, this flight was just another in its long record of successful operations. Jeju Air had established itself as a trusted name in South Korean aviation since its founding in 2005. Known for its affordable fares and punctual service, it had grown to become one of the country's most recognizable airlines, with an extensive network of domestic and international routes. Its fleet of modern aircraft, primarily Boeing 737-800s, had earned it a solid reputation among budget-conscious travelers. And until this day, Jeju Air had maintained a strong safety record, with no significant accidents to tarnish its name. That evening, the weather was calm over Bangkok. The skies were clear, and there were no reports of turbulence expected along the flight path. The crew completed their pre-flight checks. The flight attendants conducted their final safety demonstrations, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Jeju Air Flight 2216, en route to Muin International Airport. Our flight time is approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes, and we are expecting smooth conditions throughout the journey. Passengers settled into their seats. Among them were families with young children, couples returning from vacation, and individuals flying alone, perhaps thinking about their plans for the new year ahead. At 9:40 p.m. local time, the aircraft pushed back from the gate and taxied to the runway. Minutes later, it was airborne, climbing steadily into the night sky. For most of the journey, Flight 2216 cruised without incident. At 38,000 feet, passengers relaxed in their seats, some dozing off while others flipped through in-flight magazines. The crew carried out their duties professionally, ensuring that everything was on schedule for the plane's 2:15 a.m. arrival at Muin International Airport. But as the aircraft began its descent into Muin, something unexpected happened, something no one could have predicted. Radar at Muin tracked the plane as it entered its final approach. For air traffic controllers, it was just another late-night arrival at the quiet regional airport. But just minutes before the plane was due to land, a mayday call came through from the cockpit. Passengers felt a sudden, violent jolt as the plane shuddered in midair. Those who were awake looked around in confusion, unsure of what had just happened. In the cockpit, the pilots were bombarded with warning lights and alarms. The instruments displayed a critical failure. The captain reported engine issues, specifically a complete loss of thrust in both engines. Adding to the problem, the landing gear wasn't responding. What followed was a desperate attempt by the flight crew to land the plane safely. But the challenges they faced were insurmountable. By the time the aircraft came to rest, it was clear that the tragedy was one of the worst aviation disasters in South Korea's history. In the days and weeks that followed, investigators would pore over the wreckage, the flight data recorders, and witness accounts to determine what had gone so catastrophically wrong. The final report would leave many in shock. What initially seemed like an isolated mechanical failure turned out to be something far more complex. Was this tragedy preventable, or was it a freak accident caused by nature itself? The answers would send ripples through the aviation community and beyond. The engines of the Boeing 737-800 were designed to withstand small impacts, but the flock that struck Flight 2216 was large enough to overwhelm the engines completely. Turbine blades were shattered, and critical systems were damaged. The pilots now faced a dual-engine failure, a scenario every aviator trains for but hopes never to encounter. As if the loss of both engines wasn't enough, the bird strike also disrupted the plane's hydraulic system, which controls vital functions, including the landing gear. When the pilots attempted to deploy the gear, it remained unresponsive. The situation had gone from bad to worse. With no thrust and no landing gear, the aircraft was in a critical state. The pilots were effectively flying a 90,000-pound glider, racing against time to get it safely on the ground. In the cabin, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. The plane's sudden loss of power created an unsettling silence, broken only by the muffled alarms from the cockpit. Passengers looked around anxiously, some whispering prayers, others gripping the armrests of their seats. Flight attendants, trained for emergencies, moved quickly through the aisles, instructing passengers to brace for impact. In the cockpit, the captain and co-pilot worked with precision and focus. The captain, a veteran with over 2 decades of experience, took control of the aircraft, while the co-pilot managed communications and assisted with troubleshooting. Their first priority was to restart the engines, but despite multiple attempts, the turbines remained lifeless. Without power, the plane's descent was inevitable. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the captain declared a mayday. Mayday, mayday. Jeju Air Flight 2216. We've lost both engines. Hydraulic failure. Preparing for emergency landing. The call was received by air traffic control at Muin, who immediately cleared the runway and dispatched emergency response teams. Firefighters, paramedics, and airport staff prepared for the worst. Knowing the odds of a safe landing were slim, the pilots now faced a harrowing decision. With no engines and no landing gear, they had 2 options: attempt a water landing in the nearby sea or try a belly landing on the runway. Both were fraught with risk, but the captain chose the latter, reasoning that the runway offered the best chance of survival. However, without hydraulic control, the pilots had limited ability to steer or brake the aircraft once it touched down. They were effectively flying blind. As the plane descended, the tension in the cabin reached its peak. Passengers held hands, whispered to loved ones, and clutched their seatbacks. The flight attendants shouted instructions over the noise. Brace, brace, keep your heads down. The cabin lights flickered, and the plane grew colder as auxiliary power struggled to keep systems running. On the ground, emergency crews watched as the plane approached. The Boeing 737-800 was descending faster than normal, its landing gear visibly retracted. Sparks flew as the belly of the aircraft skimmed the edge of the runway. The sound of metal scraping against asphalt echoed through the night. But as the plane touched down, disaster struck again. Without the support of landing gear, the plane veered off the runway. The flames roared through the cabin, consuming everything in their path, and collided with a concrete embankment designed to house navigation antennas. The impact was devastating. The intense heat melted metal and shattered windows, creating a scene of utter devastation. Smoke filled the air, choking anyone still alive inside the wreckage. For the passengers and crew, the odds of survival were now almost non-existent. The front of the plane crumpled, and a massive fire engulfed the fuselage. For those inside, the situation had gone from dire to catastrophic. The crash site was a scene of chaos and destruction. Emergency crews rushed to the wreckage, battling flames and searching desperately for survivors. Out of 181 people on board, only 2 would emerge alive, a testament to the sheer devastation of the crash. The question now was, how did it come to this? What could have been done to prevent this unimaginable tragedy? As the minutes passed, the flames began to subside, revealing the full extent of the destruction. The fuselage was barely recognizable, reduced to a charred skeleton of twisted metal. First responders combed through the wreckage, searching desperately for signs of life. Against all odds, they found two survivors, a man and a child, both in critical condition but alive. They were pulled from the wreckage and rushed to a nearby hospital, where medical teams worked tirelessly to save them. Out of 181 people on board, only 2 survived, a testament to the sheer devastation of the crash. The loss of life was overwhelming. Families waiting at Muan International Airport were met not with reunions, but with the shattering news of the tragedy. The quiet regional airport was transformed into a scene of grief and chaos as loved ones struggled to process what had happened. The crash of Jeju Air Flight 2216 would go down as South Korea's deadliest aviation disaster in decades. The images of the burning wreckage, the bravery of the first responders, and the stories of those who perished would haunt the nation for years to come. But how had this tragedy unfolded? What had gone so catastrophically wrong in those final moments? As investigators arrived on the scene, they were determined to uncover the answers. The evidence they found would reveal a chilling series of events, shedding light on the true cause of the disaster. In the immediate aftermath of the Jeju Air Flight 2216 tragedy, the investigation began with urgency. The crash had claimed 179 lives, leaving only 2 survivors in critical condition. For South Korea's Aviation and Railway Accident Investigation Board, or ARAB, this was not just an inquiry. It was a mission to understand what had gone so catastrophically wrong and to ensure that such a tragedy would never happen again. Joined by international experts, including representatives from Boeing and independent aviation safety consultants, the team faced a monumental task: to reconstruct the events of that fateful flight and uncover the truth behind the disaster. The first priority for investigators was to secure the crash site. The wreckage of the Boeing 737-800 lay scattered near the runway at Muan International Airport, surrounded by burnt debris and the remnants of the catastrophic fire. Emergency crews worked around the clock, combing through the scene for evidence. Their goal was to recover the plane's black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR. These devices, though often damaged in crashes, are designed to withstand intense heat and impact, and they serve as the most reliable witnesses to an aircraft's final moments. It took several painstaking hours, but eventually, the black boxes were located amidst the charred wreckage. Investigators breathed a sigh of relief when they confirmed that both devices were intact. These black boxes would provide a wealth of information, from the pilot's communications to detailed data about the plane's altitude, speed, and system performance in the critical minutes leading up to the crash. While the black boxes were being analyzed, forensic teams focused on the wreckage itself. The engines, or what remained of them, immediately drew attention. Both turbines showed significant signs of damage: blades shattered, casings cracked, and evidence of extreme overheating. As investigators examined the engines closely, they discovered something that would prove to be a pivotal piece of evidence: traces of bird feathers and blood embedded within the turbines. The discovery confirmed that Flight 2216 had suffered a bird strike, and not just any bird strike, one severe enough to cause both engines to fail. This finding aligned with the mayday call made by the captain, who reported engine failure shortly before the crash. But while the bird strike was a critical factor, it was not the sole reason for the devastating outcome. Investigators needed to dig deeper to understand the chain of events that led to the loss of 179 lives. Bird strikes are a known hazard in aviation. Globally, thousands of such incidents are reported every year. Most result in minor damage, as modern jet engines are built to withstand the impact of small birds. However, the bird strike that brought down Flight 2216 was extraordinary. A large flock of birds, likely geese or herons based on early analysis, struck the plane during its descent. The high speed of the aircraft combined with the size and number of birds created a catastrophic scenario. When birds are ingested into jet engines, the damage can be severe. In the case of Flight 2216, both engines were struck almost simultaneously, causing a phenomenon known as dual-engine flameout. This means that the engines lost all thrust, leaving the aircraft gliding without power. Additionally, the force of the impact disrupted the plane's hydraulic systems, which control essential functions such as the landing gear and steering. For the flight crew, this created an almost impossible situation: no engines, no landing gear, and limited control over the aircraft. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to the crash site itself. The flight crew had attempted a belly landing on the runway, a risky maneuver, but the best option given the circumstances. However, the plane had veered off the runway and collided with a concrete embankment. This embankment, located just beyond the runway's edge, housed navigation antennas critical for airport operations. But its proximity to the runway proved to be a deadly design flaw. When the aircraft struck the embankment, the impact ruptured its fuel tanks, igniting the massive fire that consumed the fuselage. Investigators concluded that if the embankment had not been there, the plane might have skidded to a stop on open ground, and the resulting fire could have been minimized. The presence of the embankment turned a severe accident into a catastrophic loss of life. The data from the black boxes provided a detailed timeline of the flight's final moments. The cockpit voice recorder captured the calm professionalism of the pilots as they worked to manage the crisis. The captain's voice could be heard issuing commands, communicating with air traffic control, and attempting to reassure the crew. Meanwhile, the flight data recorder revealed the extent of the damage. Both engines lost thrust within seconds of the bird strike, and the hydraulic system failed shortly thereafter. One haunting detail stood out. The pilots had mere seconds to react to a cascade of failures. Despite their efforts, the dual-engine failure and the lack of steering made it impossible to avoid the collision with the embankment. The black boxes confirmed what investigators had feared. The crash was the result of a combination of rare and devastating factors. The findings of the investigation sparked immediate action. South Korea's aviation authorities announced plans to remove hazardous structures, like the embankment, from the vicinity of airport runways. Muin International Airport underwent significant renovations to improve safety standards, and similar changes were implemented at other regional airports across the country. To address the issue of bird strikes, new radar systems capable of detecting flocks in real time were installed near major airports. These systems allow air traffic controllers to reroute planes or delay landings to avoid potential collisions. Additionally, wildlife management teams increased efforts to deter birds from congregating near airports through habitat modification and the use of deterrent technologies. The crash of Jeju Air Flight 2216 became a case study in the aviation industry. Experts around the world examined the findings to identify lessons that could be applied to prevent similar tragedies. Engine manufacturers explored new technologies to make turbines more resilient to bird strikes, while airport designers revisited guidelines for runway safety zones. The tragedy, though devastating, became a catalyst for progress. The investigation provided answers, but it also left a profound sense of loss. For the families of the victims, the systemic changes came too late to save their loved ones. But there was hope that the lessons learned from this tragedy would save lives in the future. The crash of Flight 2216 serves as a sobering reminder of the delicate balance between human innovation, natural forces, and the need for constant vigilance in aviation safety. The crash of Jeju Air Flight 2216 was not just an aviation disaster. It was a human tragedy. In the quiet town of Muin, the loss of 179 lives left a profound impact. Families were shattered, communities were left grieving, and an entire nation mourned together. Each person on that flight had a story, a life filled with hopes, dreams, and loved ones waiting for them. For those families, the night of December 29, 2024, would forever be marked by heartbreak and unanswered questions. In the days following the crash, memorials began to appear at Muan International Airport. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes lined the entrance, left by grieving family members and strangers alike. Photographs of the victims, smiling faces frozen in time, served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of the tragedy. Vigils were held across South Korea, where communities came together to remember those lost and to offer support to the survivors and their families. Among the tributes were stories shared by loved ones, stories of joy, kindness, and resilience. There was the young couple returning from their honeymoon, the grandmother visiting her family for the holidays, the child who had just celebrated their birthday in Thailand. These were not just statistics. They were lives that touched others and left behind legacies of love. While the pain of loss will never fade for those who knew the victims, the crash of Flight 2216 left a legacy that reached far beyond the families it directly affected. It forced the aviation industry to confront vulnerabilities in safety protocols and to reevaluate how human ingenuity interacts with the unpredictable forces of nature. The investigation into the crash shed light on the dangers posed by bird strikes and the critical importance of runway safety design. Airports across South Korea and the world began implementing changes inspired by the lessons of Flight 2216. Hazardous structures near runways were removed. Advanced radar systems were installed to detect birds and flight paths, and airlines invested in stronger engine technology to withstand greater impacts. These measures, while unable to undo the past, would undoubtedly save countless lives and years. The crash also raised deeper questions about the balance between innovation and vulnerability. In an industry built on cutting-edge technology and precision, how do we prepare for the unpredictable? How do we account for the forces of nature that can turn routine flights into emergencies? These are questions that challenge not just engineers and pilots, but society as a whole. The tragedy of Flight 2216 reminds us that even in our most advanced systems, there is no room for complacency. It is a call to remain vigilant, to continue learning, and to adapt to a world where the unexpected can and will happen. As we reflect on this tragedy, we must ask ourselves, how can we better prepare for the unpredictable? And how can we honor the lives lost by learning from this disaster? The answers may not come easily, but they are questions we cannot afford to ignore. The 179 lives lost on that flight deserve more than remembrance. They deserve action and change. For the families, the memory of their loved ones will forever be a part of their lives. For the aviation industry, the crash of Flight 2216 will remain a sobering reminder of the importance of vigilance, innovation, and the pursuit of safety. And for all of us, it is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to grieve, to learn, and to strive for a better, safer world. But this story is not just about loss. It is also about resilience and change. The reforms that followed this disaster have made our skies safer and our airports more prepared. The lessons learned from Flight 2216 honor the 179 lives lost by ensuring their tragedy was not in vain. Now it's your turn to reflect. What are your thoughts on this devastating case? Could more have been done to prevent this tragedy? Or was it simply an unavoidable act of nature? Share your opinions in the comments below. I'd love to hear your voice. And remember, this is just one story from the vault. With 114 more true stories waiting to be revealed, there's so much more to uncover. Make sure to subscribe to In the True Crime Vault and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when the next case is released. Together, let's honor the victims, explore the stories, and seek the truth behind the events that shape our world.